Welcome, everyone, to the 16th Annual Growing Online Learning Conference presented by ILCO, or Illinois Community Colleges Online. The theme for this year's conference is AI, Transforming Education for Tomorrow. We hope that this year's conference offers you ideas and strategies for engaging students with effective use of artificial intelligence. I'm Jeff Newell. Thank you for being here today. ILCO would like to thank Heartland Community College for again providing the web conferencing platform for the conference. Please note that captioning is available for the conference sessions. Our schedule briefly for the 3 days is on the screen. It's also available on the conference website at ilco.net under resources and events. The link to attend the live sessions will be found on the conference website and in the updated email that I sent out to our registrants. If you have any questions about accessing the sessions, please contact me at jeff.newell@illinois.gov. Recordings of these presentations and handouts will be available on the conference website following the conference. And a note for our participants, please stay muted when you're not speaking. We will be taking Q&A throughout, so you're welcome to ask questions throughout or at the end. Our keynote presentation this morning is Empowering Instructors Through Generative AI. We're very excited to have Nicholas Mathis with us here today. He's the Senior Vice President for Project Management at Anthology. And prior to Anthology, Nicholas was the co-founder and CEO of Frontier, which developed Ally as a revolutionary tool that helps institutions make their course materials more accessible for all learners. Ally, of course, was later acquired by Blackboard, and Nicholas is now doing interesting work with them as they embed AI into their platform. Thank you for being here with us today, Nicholas. I'll turn it over to you.
My pleasure. And hey, good morning, everyone. A pleasure to be here. I will not be able to see the chat while I'm in full screen mode, so do feel free to kind of pause me or stop me at any point in time as any questions come up. But what I was really kind of hoping to get to talk through today with all of you is really kind of to think about what is a framework for how to think about the use of artificial intelligence within the context of education. So how do we think about how does AI and everything that's happened over the last kind of year and last few months, how does that fit into our context, and how can we actually embrace that in a positive way while also being very conscious of some of the risks and some of the potential challenges that come with it. Before kind of going into the generative AI side of things, I actually want to do a little bit of a step back in history and really talk about kind of AI as a whole, like everything that happened before. I think it was October of 2022 when ChatGPT really came onto the scene, which kind of changed the space pretty dramatically. But AI in itself has been available for, or has been around for decades. My personal background is in artificial intelligence, and there's been lots of different ways in which artificial intelligence has been applied to our day-to-day for, again, for years and years and years. So some of this is not actually as new as we sometimes think it is. And as we think about kind of the application of artificial intelligence before generative AI into the area of education, one of the common challenges that I would say that we've had as an industry is that we've really struggled as an industry with applying artificial intelligence in a way that actually made sense for education. And kind of one of my taglines is that the obvious isn't always right. And I've got a few examples here. They're actually from 2015 and 2016, I believe. And they're kind of from educational technology players in our space, where kind of the first one talks about kind of the Netflix of education, where the future of learning is found in personalized instruction, kind of delivering educational content tailored to learners' preferences, interests, schedules, and is this kind of view of personalized learning that really aligns with what we see and do on a day-to-day basis in the rest of our lives. The one on the right is very similar. It's from another player in the educational technology space, where they're kind of saying we've got the most comprehensive database on the educational experience. And now what we can do now is we can actually start making recommendations, start making suggestions to the student or instructor on how they can be more successful. Watch this video, read this passage, et cetera, et cetera. And this is all very logical. One of the challenges is that this doesn't necessarily mean that it actually works in the context of education. And I wanted to explain that a little bit in terms of because we often talk about how education is different. In this case, it actually is. And so I wanted to go to kind of very common examples that we often think about when thinking about artificial intelligence, such as Netflix, Amazon. They use lots of different kind of machine learning techniques or artificial intelligence techniques, and I'll give you a few examples for Netflix specifically. So these are all kind of pre-2022 things that were happening quite commonly in the real world, and we won't go into too much detail here. But a few things that, for example, Netflix does is that they will recommend movies, series to you. So they use recommendation algorithms, and what they're really doing behind the scenes is they are basically looking at what have you watched before, what are your friends kind of people that they can connect you with, or similar people, what are they watching, and based on kind of previous behavior, they can then recommend movies in the same genre, movies that use the same actors, and so it feels like they are providing kind of relevant suggestions. So that's one example. A second example is, for example, one of the things that Netflix does is they look at your behavior as an individual user of the Netflix platform, and they actually cluster you together with other people behind the scenes that have kind of similar behavior to you or watch similar things to you, and so they categorize you into groups, and then they can make suggestions based on how they've categorized you, which often is very relevant. Sometimes this is why you kind of sometimes see weird suggestions as well. Another one, and this is where it gets a little bit more advanced, is that Netflix does a lot of what they call predictive modeling. So what they will actually do is they will, based on all of the data that they're looking at, they will predict when there's going to be high demand for a specific movie or a specific series based on a whole bunch of variables, and they're actually going to make sure that they're almost going to pre-cache, or they're going to make that movie more readily available or that series more readily available. And that's based on just looking at very large amounts of kind of behavioral information. So that's another example. And this is where it gets really kind of advanced and a little bit creepy as well. So one of the things that Netflix, for example, does is they apply kind of more advanced AI techniques they will actually, for example, generate different thumbnails for the same content, for the same movie, for the same series. And they are going to change which thumbnail you as an individual see based on what they think you are most likely to click. So if you kind of have a history of looking at kind of more romantic content, then in the Riverdale example here, they're actually going to give you that thumbnail because they think you're more likely to click it. And so in the context of Netflix, this all makes a lot of sense. And the reason why this works quite well in the context of an Amazon or a Netflix is because they have information, they are kind of structured, they have data sets that align with what traditional AI techniques require to work well. And what traditional AI techniques, this is kind of pre-generative AI, what they require to work well is they need a very large set of individuals that are interacting with a very small number of items, which is the case with both Netflix and Amazon. The second thing that they require is that they need the things that they are interacting with have to be very structured. They have to have a lot of structured metadata. There's got to be semantic information there. And when you have these two ingredients, like a large user set that's interacting with a relatively small number of items, and you've got a very structured data set, then these kind of traditional old AI techniques work really well. Now, this is kind of why I said at the beginning, the obvious isn't always right, because what a lot of institutions, a lot of vendors were trying to do is kind of apply these same techniques in the context of education, not understanding that our context is very different. Which brings me to the data set, and I promise this will get a little less technical in just a second. But if you look at kind of our day-to-day, in terms of number of individuals or number of users, for example, Amazon has latest count 214 million users in the US. Netflix has 192 million. For our LMS, Blackboard, we've got 35 million. So we're smaller, but kind of roughly, we're not million miles apart either, but we have a smaller number of users because we are dealing with students and instructors at institutions. Where it becomes really interesting is that within those kind of 35 million users of our LMS, there's actually over 3 billion individual content items, assignments, etc., that they are interacting with that they are essentially interacting with. Those are distinct items within the learning management system. While if you look at Netflix, they are dealing with only 13,900 titles, and Amazon, we may think they've got lots of stuff, but they really only have 12 million items that you can buy through their through their online store. And so we're dealing with an entirely different kind of way of kind of an entirely different data space, which is why those traditional AI techniques or kind of those traditional approaches to AI, or even just the concept of highly personalized learning, where we suggest a specific passage or a specific video based on a specific student, really hasn't worked for us in education because we've got such a dramatically different space. The other thing is that Netflix has got a lot of metadata around their titles, like what type of movie is it, who are the actors, where was it shot, etc. So they've got a lot of metadata. Amazon has got a lot of metadata as well. What type of product is it? What's its weight? So they've got all of this metadata as well. We actually, as an educational industry, we've got very little metadata. We've got a lot of kind of free form, unstructured data. And so those traditional techniques don't work all that well. Now, enter October of 2022 and enter generative AI. So generative AI is such as ChatGPT, for example, is a fundamentally different way of kind of looking at, or it's a fundamentally different kind of AI technique, or the way in which it surfaces. And generative AI is really kind of built to be, or is really designed to work really well with unstructured information, unstructured data, and to work really well with natural language. And so suddenly we're going from a place where everything that was out there in terms of AI was really not designed for what we were dealing with as an educational industry. Generative AI kind of flips that upside down. It is actually designed to work well with exactly what we deal with as an educational industry on a day-to-day basis. It's designed to work well with unstructured information and natural language. So generative AI is extremely applicable to education, and education is likely one of the industries that gets impacted by generative AI the most because it aligns so well in terms of what it needs to work well. Now, when we talk about generative AI, and if I think there's 140 of us here, I think if I would ask all of you how you feel about generative AI, we would probably get about 300 different opinions. So there's a lot of opinion in this space right now, and it is very polarized, and it is very extreme in many cases, I would say. So there's a lot of opinions about generative AI, all the way from extremely concerned to kind of extremely bullish about the potential of AI. And I actually wanted to unpack just a few example opinions, and I think you'll recognize some of these, but these are some of the things that I hear on a day-to-day basis, and kind of unpack them a little bit. So one, if kind of applying generative AI to education, one that I hear very frequently is the concern that AI is going to lower the quality of our courses. I think this is kind of an interesting, so there is a really good study that was done by the Boston Consulting Group. I've got the link here, and I will share the link afterwards as well. That is really worth kind of reading, or kind of, it's a really good read. But what they essentially did is they had different groups of people do different types of tasks, both with the help of generative AI or without the help of generative AI. And so what they saw is, so one of the types of tasks that they had that group do was creative ideation tasks. So really having the individuals use generative AI to help with creative ideation tasks. And then they had a group that didn't use generative AI to work through those creative ideation tasks. So what they saw in that study is that the group that was using, in this case, GPT-4 as kind of the technology to assist those individuals with these creative ideation tasks, is that on average, and then they kind of asked people to evaluate the quality of the output. And what they saw is that for the group that was using generative AI as part of the creative ideation process, they generally scored much better. So they actually outperformed the ones that were not using generative AI by about 40%. And if we kind of zoom out, this is kind of the overall result that they had for that particular task. So on the top, you can see the results for when no generative AI was used as part of the creative ideation task, and it's a little bit all over the place. And then at the bottom, you can see the results of the group that actually used generative AI as part of the ideation, kind of the creative ideation task. And so what they saw in the group that was using it as part of the process is that the average performance improved quite considerably by 40%, but actually everyone moved to the right. So everyone improved. The ones that were already doing well didn't improve quite as much, but they still improved a little bit. The ones that were doing poorly improved much more on average. So the variance in terms of performance is reduced quite dramatically. And I actually think it's important that we kind of take a step back from these results, because there's some really, really significant potential consequences from this. So if this is actually true, then there is a huge opportunity in front of us to use these technologies to improve the quality of the learning experience, or the quality of the courses that we provide to our students across the board. So that is really exciting. I think these results are essentially telling us there is a huge opportunity to improve the quality of what we're doing. The other kind of consequence of this is that as an institution, if you look at this, you don't really have a choice but to embrace these technologies, because otherwise you do have a significant risk. You're also operating in a competitive environment. You have a risk of kind of falling behind and not keeping up with the quality that can be offered elsewhere. And then the third one that's obviously important is that your technology choice actually becomes increasingly important, because you need to make sure that you're kind of leaning into technologies that allow you to embrace the power of what can be done in a positive way here. So this is actually really significant to think about, and I think the opportunity here is very exciting. This is another example. This was a study done by the University of Derby in the UK. There's a Times Higher Education article at the bottom that I will share as well. But they did something quite similar. So they had a group of instructors create course content without the help of generative AI, and they had a group of instructors create course content without the help of generative AI. And essentially, they then put that content in front of students, and then they asked students to evaluate the quality and the engagement level of the content that was provided by the instructors in this case. And so they essentially recruited 361 students to kind of participate in this, and each student was kind of asked to judge the content and the engagement with kind of a standardized survey. And so what they saw as part of that study, which is very similar to what we were looking at before, is that there was a statistically significant preference for the content that was co-generated between kind of the instructor and the AI over the content that was generated by just the instructor. So this is a very similar conclusion. It's just an entirely different study. Now, when we kind of zoom out a little bit, this is based on a survey that we did about, I think it was about 7 months ago, so the results might be slightly different here, but we did a global survey with faculty. In this case, these are results from the faculty survey, where we kind of, two of the questions that we asked them is kind of how frequently do you use generative AI tools today? Where really what we were seeing is that about 28% had kind of experimented with it, but 28% was familiar with the term but had never used it, and then 17% had never really heard of it. And so we've got this almost, I think it's about 70%, more than 70%, that either hasn't used it at all or has kind of experimented with it once. And then on the right-hand side, the second question that we asked is kind of how do you think your use of these tools will change in the next 6 months? And about half said that it would either stay the same or decrease, and about half said that they would expect it to increase, but not necessarily significantly. So I think this is kind of showing a little bit of a disconnect between the opportunity that exists if the technology is used in in a positive way, in the right way, and then kind of the actual usage that's happening on a day-to-day basis. That was kind of the first opinion that I wanted to unpack. The second opinion that I wanted to unpack, which I think you will all have heard, and I hear this every day, is that kind of concern that AI is going to replace me as an instructor. And I actually think that couldn't be further from the truth. So in order to unpack this one a little bit, I wanted to introduce the concept of AI hallucinations. And so what a hallucination is in the context of generative AI, or in the context of a large language model, is really the generative AI kind of providing you with a response that feels and sounds correct, but is actually factually incorrect. And this is a really important concept to understand. And this is Sam Altman, is actually the I guess the CEO of OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT. And in a not so kind of a fairly recent interview, what he said is that these AI hallucinations, they're actually more a feature than a bug. It's not something that's expected to go away entirely. It may improve over time, but it's not something that is going to go away entirely over time. And actually, it is the reason why it hallucinates. Kind of the fact that it hallucinates is actually a requirement to allow this technology to be creative in nature. And it's very difficult to kind of make a distinction between asking an AI to come up with a fictional story or a song versus kind of providing you with something that has to be factually correct. You can't really make that distinction. And in order for it to be able to be creative, hallucinations are going to happen. And so this is from a study from McKinsey. And so they've worked with kind of hundreds of organizations, including higher education organizations, on kind of implementing generative AI. And kind of there's kind of a list of different recommendations here, but one of their recommendations at the bottom is similar to what Sam Altman was saying in the previous slide. There are no silver bullets for hallucinations. And so we always have to include a human in the loop to make sure that the outputs are validated and that we kind of ensure that the output is used in a very responsible way. So I think this is really, really important, because this essentially means that we cannot relinquish control, or we cannot take control away from the instructor. They still need to be the owner. They still need to be in charge, and they need to be responsible for actually approving the assistance that's being provided by generative AI. Now, I think there is a opportunity here that kind of as you kind of couple generative AI with the instructor and put the instructor in control, that there's an opportunity for some time savings, for some efficiencies, to provide inspiration, to kind of help you work through certain things more quickly. I come from a family where everyone's an educator, my parents, my sisters, my grandparents, and I've never heard an educator say that they're not busy enough. So hopefully by kind of applying this in the right way, we can actually free up a little bit of time, or kind of provide some efficiencies. Another one that I think this one's difficult to wrap your head around, but it's actually a really important one. So the same study from the Boston Consulting Group. So while the average performance was improving when the instructors were, or when that group of people was using generative AI as part of the creative ideation process, what they also saw at the same time is that the diversity of ideas that was being generated actually went down. And this is kind of logical. If everyone's using the same tool to kind of help with ideation, then your diversity of ideas is going to go down. And this is what they refer to as a creativity trap. And this is one that we have to be extremely aware of. And really, I think this kind of creates a very clear role for the instructor to not only be in control and kind of the human in the middle that validates output, but also as the one that has to be responsible for driving the actual differentiation. It's not the tool that's driving the differentiation. The tool can help you think through some things, but you as an instructor are responsible for actually injecting the differentiation and the kind of the context in which this tool needs to be or can be applied. So I know that's a lot to take in, but this is a really, really important concept, and we have to be aware of this as we start to think about how we can responsibly start to deploy these tools for how we can start to responsibly deploy these tools. So that was kind of the second opinion. So those were all on the concern side of things. The third opinion, which you will have heard as well, is the kind of the very bullish side of things. Oh, this is great. AI is it's gonna fix all of my problems. It's gonna take care of all of my grading. It's gonna automatically personalize the course for my student, and it's gonna be wonderful. And I think, again, coming back to that Boston Consulting Group study, so one of the, as I said, they actually had the groups of people do different types of tasks. And one other types of tasks next to the creative ideation was they had them do analysis tasks with the help of generative AI and without the help of generative AI. And what they saw for those analysis tasks, and actually, I would kind of, the way in which they set that up, I would compare it to grading, for example, and providing feedback where you're trying to qualitatively assess what a student has done is very similar to the analysis tasks. And so what they saw is that for the group that was using generative AI as part of those analysis tasks, they actually started to perform worse compared to the group that wasn't using generative AI. So they kind of identify this paradox almost, where on the one hand, people are putting a lot of trust in these technologies in areas that they're actually not entirely designed for or competent in, while sometimes they don't put enough trust in kind of the areas where it can be really helpful, such as creative ideation. And here's a few examples of how this kind of starts to play out in practice, and actually comes back to the obvious isn't always right. So as generative AI came onto the scene, one of the first areas that everyone kind of ran towards is the kind of the one-on-one personal tutor for a student, which logically makes a lot of sense, but it actually, when you look at it in practice and you understand the kind of the positives and the negatives or the risks of some of these technologies, maybe it actually doesn't make all that much sense for this to be the first step. And there's a few examples here. Georgia Tech, for example, they have been rolling out a kind of a fully automated one-on-one AI tutor for students, and have been having a really difficult time to stop it from hallucinating. They've built this whole series of technologies to try and stop it from hallucinating, but it's still not quite working. And I think there's some real questions here. If you have a fully automated AI tutor that works with a student, you've taken the instructor out of that loop, how do you respond to a student being provided with incorrect information by that AI tutor? Let's say that they go into the final exam and they provide something that is incorrect, but the AI tutor told them, like, how do you deal with that? Is that then incorrect, or do you have to? I mean, there's just very big potential issues and potential reputational damage that we have to be very aware of. Similar on the right is Khanmigos. This is actually kind of a K-12 focused AI tutor, and they're having very similar problems. So it can really kind of help you think through some things, but they are also struggling with very significant kind of hallucinations. And then the question is, what do you do with that? Because you've taken the instructor, you've taken the human out of the loop. So to me, this is kind of a good example where, okay, this may be a logical thing. It's logical that this was one of the first areas that we kind of ran towards as an industry, but did it really make sense as a starting point or as a solution, understanding the strengths and the weaknesses of these technologies? So coming back to kind of our opinion spectrum. So obviously there's a lot of concern out there. There's a lot of hype out there, but I think as with anything, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. And it's really going to be a matter of kind of finding that middle ground where these technologies can be applied in a responsible way, in a way that aligns with how these technologies work, and how you reduce or remove some of the risk of kind of inappropriately using these technologies. So this is kind of what I like to refer to as the middle ground of appropriateness. And I think as an educational industry, knowing that generative AI is so applicable to what we are doing and what we are dealing with, I think a lot of the next several months, the next several years are going to be about finding that middle ground of appropriateness, where basically we leverage this technology in ways where we can essentially provide solutions for real problems or kind of meet real needs that can have really high impact, but also minimize risk. So that is really going to be key. I think this is kind of the framework that I think we should all have in mind as we evaluate kind of potential opportunities of how to leverage these technologies or how not to leverage these technologies. And there are going to be places, lots of places, I think, where we are going to kind of jump into the top right quadrant of this chart, where we are going to, and to me, kind of fully automated one-to-one AI tutors would be an example of this. It's an area where, yes, we could have really high impact, but because of the risk of things like hallucinations, bias, etc., there is a high degree of risk around that as well. And I don't know if we're truly ready to kind of deal with that risk at this point. So I think this is kind of an important framework as far as I'm concerned. I don't know if any of you were at EDUCAUSE, the EDUCAUSE conference back in October. But one of the things that was at the EDUCAUSE conference was this from Boston Dynamics, I think, the big robotics company. And so they had this at EDUCAUSE, which is basically a robo dog that is designed to, or has been programmed to go around educational institutions, go around campus, and do things like identify litter, identify areas of threat, for example. And it's kind of fully automated. And to me, I think I'll kind of leave this open for the group, but to me, this is a question like I would love to see a raise of hands on kind of who finds this kind of a high impact, low risk solution, who finds this terrifying. I personally find this terrifying because you're kind of, you're kind of taking that human out of the loop. And so to me, this is an area where we're kind of jumping into potentially an area that's could be high impact, but could have potential risk as well. So I thought this was interesting, and I think this is kind of the physical manifestation of what we may end up doing within our technology or within our software as well. So again, coming back to that kind of framework, really, as I said, I think a lot of the next several months, a lot of the next several years are going to be about finding that top left quadrant, those kind of areas of that middle ground of appropriateness where we can solve real problems with high impact, but also reduce or manage risk as best as possible. Okay, so that's kind of the framework. Another thing I wanted to talk about is academic integrity, because while things like fully automated one-to-one AI tutors were one of the first areas that a lot of organizations or a lot of vendors kind of ran towards, the very first one and the one that was very much top of mind was around academic integrity. And how does this change what we're doing, given the potential for students to use these technologies from a cheating perspective, or actually get them to do the work for them? And first of all, I don't want to minimize kind of the academic integrity conversation, because it is a real, it's a real conversation, it's a real concern. And so as part of the same survey, we also surveyed students around the world. And you can see that these results are very different. So we also asked them, how would you describe your use of generative AI tools? And we are seeing that the usage from students is significantly higher. And then when we asked them, how do you expect that to change in the next 6 months? Again, I think it's about 60% of them said that they expected to, the vast majority said that they expected to either stay the same or increase, but about 60% expected to increase. So we've got this really interesting imbalance where students are embracing these technologies much more quickly compared to instructors, which again makes that academic integrity conversation really relevant. Now, obviously, one of the first areas of kind of the way in which we initially tried to solve that problem as an industry is AI detection. And I'm going to skip over this. I think this was when we surveyed institutional leaders, and plagiarism in assessment was also identified there as kind of the top concern. And I think kind of if we kind of go back to AI detection or plagiarism detection, I think this is really, we kind of get into a really interesting kind of contrast between traditional plagiarism detection and kind of plagiarism detection in a world of generative AI. We're kind of in the traditional world of plagiarism detection before GPT-4 or before kind of ChatGPT coming onto the scene. The way in which plagiarism detection worked is that they essentially a plagiarism detector would essentially collect a very large sample of previous work from the internet, from previous submissions. And then when the student submits something new, the plagiarism detection tool would then compare the work that's submitted with the previous work that it's collected. And it would then be able to tell you, actually, this part of the submission or this submission actually corresponds with something that was previously collected or was previously submitted. So it is likely plagiarized. So that kind of sort of made sense. One of the benefits of that is that you always had kind of that previous work that you could then refer to, and you could kind of overlay the two. That changes dramatically in the area of generative AI, because what generative AI does is it creates new content, original content, and not just including text, including images, including video. So you've now moved to a place where you can't just compare that to previous work, because it's actually generating new work. And so the concept of trying to identify when a student is cheating, or when they're using these tools to help them do homework or respond to questions, has become infinitely more complicated and complex. And really, that previous approach to plagiarism detection doesn't really work at all anymore. So we actually, as everything kind of kicked off, we also did some research ourselves on AI detection. As part of plagiarism detection, we actually ran a kind of a multi-month pilot with a small number of institutions, where we wanted to get some feedback on, okay, these AI detection tools, do they actually work, and are they reliable enough, so that we can make, as an organization, we can make a decision as to whether that was something we wanted to make available to the institutions that we work with. And so as part of that study, as part of that research that we did, we basically found, so one of the questions that we asked the participants is, how often do you think, and we asked them to kind of submit work that was generated by generative AI. We asked them to submit original work, and then kind of essentially asked them, how often do you think the AI detection tool kind of correctly identified whether the content was created by AI. And so the results were really kind of eye-opening. And there's a lot of independent research that's happened since that is basically confirming the same. It's confirming the same numbers, where really only 20% of instructors felt that this either often or almost always correctly identified whether something was written by AI. And the vast majority essentially said that these results weren't very reliable, and it was very easy to get around it. And then you obviously have the scenario of hybrid usage, where the human and the AI are working together, and it becomes much more complicated very quickly. As an aside, this problem gets even worse with things like Microsoft rolling out Copilot, where really generative AI will start to sit inside of Word, inside of PowerPoint, and it'll just be part of the creation process. So very, very difficult to detect. It's even very difficult to understand what you do with that. It's just part of the tools at this point. So without going into too much detail on this one, we actually have a white paper on this, where we kind of lay out all of the results from that study in a little bit more detail. But really kind of, and we will share this link as well. It's actually a really good read. It's about 11 pages. But one of the, I guess, conclusions of this white paper is really that we don't think there is a future to AI detection. We think that's kind of a flawed approach. There's too many false positives, too many false negatives. And so really the next step that needs to be taken from an industry perspective is we really need to kind of flip this upside down, and rather than try to detect the use of AI, really lean into more authentic assessment practices, where we kind of change our assessment practices to be more authentic in nature, to kind of lean into critical thinking, personal experience, to creation, those types of things that are actually more difficult to do with the use of generative AI in the first place. And so again, I will share this white paper. It's a really good read. I actually think this is really exciting. I think as an educational industry, we've been having this conversation about kind of more authentic assessment for decades. And while we've made some progress in certain areas, it's never really truly taken off. And so I think this is really exciting, because to me, generative AI may be the trigger for us to start to truly change our assessment practices to be much more authentic in nature rather than kind of the regurgitation of knowledge or content. And again, it's a move that we've been wanting to make. It's pedagogically sound. It encourages much deeper learning, but it is a move that we haven't successfully made yet. And I think this will be kind of the forcing function for us to really dramatically improve our assessment practices. I completely understand that this is not easy. Like, there's real change management involved in taking assessments or assessment practices that exist today and starting to evolve them to be more authentic in nature. But my personal opinion is that I think it's the only path in front of us if we want to continue to keep assessment meaningful. So I'm excited about that. Obviously, that goes along with some change management. All right. So and maybe actually let me pause here for just a second. I can't see the chat, so let me just pause here to see if there's any immediate questions or thoughts. Kind of the next thing I wanted to go into is really kind of a practical example of how we have tried to kind of find that middle ground of appropriateness. And so I wanted to provide as an example to kind of have you think through, okay, how do I apply that kind of framework for middle ground of appropriateness? How do I apply that to this practical example? So that's kind of the next thing I wanted to go into, but let me pause here and just see if there's any immediate thoughts or questions. And if not, I'm happy to carry on.
Well, Nicholas, there was one question that came up in the chat. I think it was back when you were referring to the that study from the British University, and the question was, were there any confounder factors considered in this analysis in extracting out the causal effect of the generative AI?
Yeah, so yeah, and they basically control for different types of variables. I don't have all of the details here, but I will share the link. They actually explain exactly how they set it up and how they try to take out kind of other factors that could be contributing to the preference. But it kind of, once taking out all of those different variables or controlling for those different variables, they still found that there was a statistically significant kind of preference for the content that was essentially co-created. But I will share the link, and there's a lot more detail on that page. It's actually a really good read, and they've got a kind of a paper about it as well. All right. Well, feel free to stop me if there's any other questions. But so I wanted to go into kind of the practical example, and so in this case, the practical example is the AI design assistant. So this is kind of our attempt to kind of starting to bring generative AI technology into, in this case, the learning management system, which is Blackboard Learn for us. And I just wanted to use it as I'm not trying to sell anything. I just wanted to use it as kind of a practical example of what we have tried to do to kind of try to find that middle ground of appropriateness, but would love some feedback on kind of what everyone thinks about the example. So one of the things that for us was really important, and just kind of wanted to provide it here as well, is that as we were working kind of towards starting to introduce these technologies, we wanted to try to make sure that we landed in that top left quadrant. And so we also defined a trustworthy AI framework that kind of defines a set of principles that we try to adhere to that hopefully leads us to kind of landing in that top left quadrant. So, and this is kind of just for your information. Maybe these are things you want to look for in kind of your context as well. But a few examples of those principles are, first of all, the institution should always be in control, and any of these kind of generative AI capability, the institution should have the control to be able to opt into those when and if they are ready to embrace that. Maybe there's some policy work that they want to do first, but I think it's important that the institution's always in control. Secondly, this to me is the most important one, is that the instructor is always in control. So this comes back to making sure that there is always a human in the middle. And so in our case with the AI design assistant, any suggestions that are made to the instructor have to be explicitly reviewed and accepted by the instructor before they can be used with students. The third one, and we didn't really talk about this, but this is actually a really important consideration and something to always think about, is around copyright and data privacy concerns. And so one of the beauties, so we are doing this in partnership with Microsoft, the AI design assistant. We've got a deep partnership with Microsoft around that. And one of the beauties of that partnership is that we can guarantee that for institutions or instructors using our AI design assistant, is that none of that information or none of that data kind of flows back into the model or is used to kind of further train model. That is just used to make it is just used to kind of make suggestions or make recommendations. This is one that you, as you kind of look at other solutions, you should look at very, very carefully, because a lot of these solutions, they essentially take what you put in them and then they kind of use that to further train their models, which I think in an educational context is not what we really want. The fourth principle for us was that we thought it was really important that generative AI wasn't used directly with students, with kind of and kind of taking out the instructor from that kind of that human in the middle, or kind of used for high stakes workflows like grading workflows, for example. Again, going back to the previous results, these may actually be workflows where we could actually do some damage potentially if kind of not applying these technologies in the right way. So we wanted to be very careful with that. And we also felt that it was important to make sure that there was kind of an institutional audit trail. So as an institution, you can understand how these technologies are being used and then use that to inform further conversations at the institution. So those were kind of five. This is kind of a subset of the principles that we have, but these are kind of five examples of the principles that we are trying to adhere to make sure that we land in that top left quadrant. Now, very quickly, kind of the AI design assistant, what it was really intended to do, as an example, was to really provide instructors with kind of inspiration as part of the course creation process, provide them with a starting point that would essentially allow them to create more engaging courses or more engaging course experiences more quickly, and really kind of do it by kind of very seamlessly integrating some of these capabilities into the workflow. And as I said, this is kind of a deep partnership between us and Microsoft. And I just wanted to take 5 minutes, if that's okay, to just provide a little bit of an example of, okay, what does that look like? Again, to give you an opportunity to think through, okay, how can we start to leverage some of these technologies within the context of education, within the context of the learning environment. So I'm in Blackboard Learn. So I'm going to do a very, very quick demo to show you some examples. And I'm an instructor that's going to teach a course on craft coffee. I think we're coming up to lunch, so hopefully this is a relevant topic. What I'm actually going to do in about 5 minutes is I'm starting from a completely blank course shell, and I'm kind of going to start to build out a little bit of my course and kind of showing how kind of the AI design assistant can provide some assistance throughout. So maybe the first thing I want to do is I want to give my course a little bit of visual interest. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a banner for my course. Obviously, I'm the instructor, I'm in control, I can provide my own banner. But we've got a second option here, which is that we connect with a very large database of royalty-free images. And then something really subtle is happening here, where based on the context of the course, the LMS in this case is actually going to suggest some potential banners based on the context of the course. So obviously, as an instructor, I can continue to refine that, but it's going to try and give me a starting point. It's very subtle, but it kind of gives me a little bit of a starting point to, in this case, more easily or more quickly identify a kind of a visual that I can add into my course to make my course a little bit more visually appealing. So maybe I like this top right one, go ahead and kind of add that in. And I can kind of move that around to kind of pick the part of the image that I want to use as my banner. And then once I'm happy with that, I can go ahead and save this. So now, kind of in a matter of a few seconds, I've been able to kind of identify a visual that kind of helps me make my course just a little bit more visually appealing. Now, the second thing I want to do as an instructor is I want to start to kind of build out my course, at least build out my course structure. And obviously, I'm an instructor, I'm in control, so I can do this manually. I can bring in a course from a previous year. You can, I mean, you're the instructor, you're in control. But now I get an additional option, which is that I can actually get the system to suggest a possible outline for my course based on the context of the course, that I'm in. And this is kind of obviously there's not a lot in the course today. So this is kind of a very basic example, but what it's basically doing is it's taking the context that's available, which in this case is kind of the name of my course, the learning outcomes have been identified, and it's going to suggest a possible structure for my course. I could actually do more. I could, for example, say, okay, I've uploaded my syllabus to the course, and now I want a suggestion for how to structure my course based on my course syllabus. We won't do that in this case, but that's kind of the allowing it to kind of align with what you've done already. And then you can kind of change, okay, I want kind of a topic-based or week-based or a module-based outline. I want images. This is kind of the complexity level, the number of learning modules that I want. And then what you can see on the right-hand side is essentially a suggestion based on what's been provided for a possible outline for my course, a possible structure for my course. And then as the instructor, I'm kind of responsible for kind of going through this. And then kind of maybe I like these first three, maybe I don't like the fourth one. And then I can kind of select the ones that I like, and I can go ahead and add them into my course. So now, either based on my learning outcomes or based on my syllabus, the system can help me kind of think through how to structure my course. And so in a matter of a few minutes, I've now gone from a completely blank course shell to a course that has kind of a visually appealing banner, and it's got a kind of a basic outline for the course that I can now continue to build out. What I didn't explicitly call out is that it's doing kind of module titles, but also providing you with descriptions or suggested descriptions, providing you with AI-generated images, and obviously you can continue to tweak this as you see fit. So now kind of we're on to the next step. Maybe I want to start building out my first week, and what I'm going to do is I've got this PDF that I've used, so I'm just going to add that into kind of my first module. This is something I want to use. It's something that I've created before. And then maybe the next thing I want to do is now I want to do a discussion activity with my students as part of this first module. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of set up a discussion. And obviously I'm kind of the instructor. I can define the discussion myself. This may be something that I've had before. So I'm the instructor, I'm in control. There is a second option here, and this comes back to kind of the authentic assessment side of things, that I can also get the system to make a suggestion to me as to what a possible discussion activity could be for my course. So now it's kind of looking at what's already in my learning module, and it's going to suggest an authentic discussion activity based on the context of your course. And what we're doing here is we're actually aligning this to Bloom's taxonomy. By default, you'll get a kind of a spread of different options. And so it's giving me a suggested kind of discussion activity that emphasizes creation. It's giving me a suggested discussion activity that kind of emphasizes evaluation. And then it's giving me one that kind of emphasizes analysis. And so and you'll see that as part of this, it's kind of bringing in different tactics that make these types of activities more authentic in nature and actually make it more difficult for them to use generative AI to complete. And so maybe I kind of like the first one as a starting point. It didn't quite, it was still in save mode. That's fine. So maybe I like the first one. I continue to tweak it. And then maybe the next thing I want to do is I want to make this kind of a graded discussion. So I can make this a graded discussion. And maybe what I want to do is I want to add a rubric to this activity. Obviously, I'm the instructor, I'm in control. I can create my own rubric, or I can bring in a rubric that I already have. But now I get an additional option, which is that I can get the system to suggest a possible grading rubric for me based on the discussion activity that I'm currently in. We all know that creating a rubric from scratch can be a lot of work. So essentially, I'm just going to give it a little bit of time. Hopefully, it comes back very quickly. So it should come up with a rubric that's kind of aligned to the activity that I have just created. I'm going to give it 2 more seconds before I move on. This is always the curse of the live demo. Okay, but anyway, it's kind of the idea is that this is another example of how we can potentially kind of help you a little bit in kind of giving you a starting point from a rubric perspective. There it comes through now, and now it's essentially evaluating that activity and then providing a possible rubric. I can continue to iterate on this. Once I'm kind of happy with this as a starting point, I can then continue to tweak from there. So as an instructor, I'm still very much in control, and then I can add that into my graded discussion. The last example that I'll show, because there's a bunch of these examples, is maybe at the end of this module, I want my students to take a formative test or a formative quiz. So maybe I want to set up a test. Obviously, I'm in control. I could do whatever I want here. I could create my own questions from scratch. I could bring in questions from my question banks, etc. But now I get an additional option, which is I can get the system to suggest some possible formative questions based on the context of the course. And actually, in this case, what I want is questions specifically based on that PDF that I uploaded. So I want questions based on that PDF. So I'm going to select that. I'm going to say that maybe I just want multiple choice questions in this case, or I can get a kind of a range of different questions. Now I'll go ahead and generate that, and now it should come back with suggested questions based on the context of that specific document that I just uploaded into my course. And now as an instructor, I can go through this. Maybe I really like this third question, and then I can go ahead and kind of add that into my formative test. So et cetera, et cetera. So again, I didn't want to go into a crazy amount of detail on this one. Let me go back to the slides real quick. And so just skipping through this, I want to make sure I stay within time. One of the things that I think is important here is that kind of the way in which this works is that, so obviously there is generative AI behind the scenes. There's kind of a large language model behind the scenes, but the real key, I think this is something you should always be looking for in solutions, is this kind of grounding layer where all of the suggestions that are made to the instructor in terms of a possible structure, formative test questions, rubrics, et cetera, are basically grounded in the context of the course and the content that's already been provided by the instructor. So last thing that I'll just kind of talk about really quickly. So this is something that's been live for us in our product for about 3 to 4 months at this point. We currently have 313 institutions around the world that have this enabled. We've seen 130,000 unique uses of some of the capabilities that we just talked through. And this number is really interesting to me. So currently, we are seeing on average just under 50% acceptance rate. So that is the percentage of time that a suggestion that's made to an instructor is reviewed and accepted by the instructor and kind of made available to students, which I actually think is, to me, that is surprisingly high because we do expect instructors to use it as a starting point to kind of iterate on it and really kind of use it as a point of inspiration. In terms of kind of the usage, what we see most is these technology. So what's being used the most is essentially helping kind of add visuals or attractive visuals more quickly into the course. The formative test question generation is kind of the second most popular, and then it kind of goes down from there. I'm going to skip over this one. And this is kind of the last one that I wanted to show, which to me kind of shows some promise. So we do some in-product surveying with kind of instructors that are using these capabilities. And so we see that when we ask instructors to kind of rate these capabilities, we see that kind of between an 82 and an 88% kind of score, I guess, out of 10, which I think is encouraging. But it's really this one on the right that I think is really promising. So we also asked them, did this actually help you save time? And so what we are seeing is that between 90 to 100% of instructors that are filling out those surveys are saying that actually this is helping me save time. So I think this is coming back to kind of that middle ground of appropriateness and all of the the strengths of these technologies, but also the risks of these technologies. This was kind of our attempt to trying to bring something in that can address a real need and a real problem, but also tries to manage the risk that potentially comes with this. So again, that was kind of our first approach at trying to land in that middle ground of appropriateness. So I will stop there. I would love for you to kind of think about this a little bit, provide us with feedback on kind of how you think this could help, but also kind of where you think some of the risks are that I may not have mentioned, but also start to think about what are some other examples of areas where we can find a middle ground of appropriateness, where we can solve real needs, real problems that have real impact, but also manage their risk as best as possible. So I will stop here. Thank you for bearing with me. There was a lot to go through in an hour, and I do have a few more minutes just in case there's any additional questions.
Thank you, Nicholas. I greatly appreciate this presentation. Does anybody have questions for Nicholas? Last call.
And I know there was a lot to take in. We will definitely make the slides available. But I think this is going to be a really this is going to impact all of us, and I think it's going to help all of us if we have a framework on kind of how to think about the right use of these technologies.
We do have one question from Nick. Go ahead, Nick.
Nicholas, wonderful presentation. Really appreciate it. I have a question in regards to, is there a limit in regards to the inputs that can be put in? Could I take a textbook, that's 500 pages, have a PDF of it, and then input it into the system now or potentially in the future?
Actually, we're no longer in the future. So one of the things that you got a sneak peek for in the demo here is that context picker, the ability to kind of point a tool to specific pieces of content, for example, that are already in your course. So which is actually about to launch live in as part of our March release. So actually next month. So with the work that we've done there, essentially you can point it at kind of any size content. So there's a lot that we're doing behind the scenes to make sure that it can kind of take that full piece of content that you're pointing it to kind of into account in the suggestions that it makes. So that is actually a very difficult problem to solve. I think we're in a place now where we have solved that, and I think others will obviously be kind of trying to solve that problem as well. But with these changes, there's no longer a limit in terms of how much context you can provide to kind of ground the suggestions that you get back.
Any other questions for Nicholas?
Does AI generate accessible content?
So I'm actually very bullish about the kind of the potential applications of AI in kind of from an accessibility perspective, because this technology has got the ability to kind of help us. It's got the ability to help us work through making existing content more accessible. Again, my background is accessibility as Ally, so this is an area that's kind of near and dear to my heart. I think this technology has huge potential to help us make images, for example, more accessible more quickly or more easily. It's got a huge potential to make video more accessible more quickly as well. Obviously, it's got to be applied in the right way, but I actually think this is going to be a significant step forward from an accessibility perspective. Also in terms of kind of making things available as kind of in different alternative formats or different ways of consuming it. This is a technology that's going to help us do that better than what we've been able to do so far. Again, obviously, it's all about landing in that top left quadrant, so we have to apply it in the right ways, and we have to make sure that whatever we do doesn't end up in kind of this place where we're kind of opening ourselves up to a lot of potential accessibility issues. But I think the kind of the potential applications of this from an accessibility perspective are very exciting. And when you kind of go out on the web and read about accessibility and generative AI, you'll find a lot of similar opinions that this is actually huge from an accessibility perspective. But there's still dots to be connected for that to kind of truly play out.
There is one more question that came in. I think we'll wrap up on this question, but the question is, do you have any suggestions on how an institution should introduce faculty to using AI for their courses?
Yeah, so I think there's lots of different ways to do that. I think for me, what's most important is that the first steps that we take, I think instructors are a really good audience to kind of take your first steps with from an institutional kind of AI perspective. I think this is kind of, and there's lots of different ways in which you can do that. Obviously, policy is an important part of this as well, so that's going to have to be part of the conversation. But it is exactly what we try to do here with the AI Design Assistant. That was kind of our first step at trying to introduce instructors to generative AI within the platform that they are using in a way that actually helps them, kind of helps provide some inspiration. So we think this could be kind of one example of how to start to create a little bit of order in the chaos, or how to give the give the technology a little bit of a face. But there's obviously different ways. I think start small, make sure that there's a policy, think about, are we doing this in a way that actually solves the problem, meets a need, but also controls risk as much as possible. And then obviously let them play with it, but also bring them in to kind of play with it together or introduce them. So lots of different ways in which it can be done. But I personally think starting with instructors is a really good way to get started.
All right. I want to say thank you, Nicholas. Again, it certainly gave me a lot to think about. If everybody can take a moment and show some appreciation to Nicholas in the chat or with reactions or whatever. But thank you again for providing us this keynote today. I want to let everybody know that we will have a conference evaluation that we'll be sending out following the conference. And a reminder that our next session is this afternoon at 2 p.m. It's Everything Everywhere, the Unprecedented Impact of Generative AI on Higher Ed with Nick Rohorchuk and Mark Lickwicki from Morton College. Following the conference, it may take a couple of weeks, but we will have all the recordings and materials posted up there for everybody to view, and I want to let everybody know that. And the link to attend the live sessions will be on the conference website as well. I do apologize again for the technical difficulties we had with the various links and trying to get the conference started today. So thank you everybody for attending, and we look forward to seeing you back here at 2 p.m.